Welcome to Khealos' Gaming Table. I'm Khealos. On this channel, I talk about tabletop RPGs, miniature war games, general geeky stuff. In case you haven't figured out, I'm still stuck in Orlando, but I've survived my second week here, so one more week, and then I get to fly home. Whether or not I have to fly back to Orlando in the future is a different story. I'm helping to train up the new IT person here. You know, with luck, he'll stick. But you never know what the future can bring, especially when we're building out the other half of the building. We'll see. Lately, I've been talking a lot about general, franchises and things like that. I'm going to swing this particular ramble back to actual gaming, specifically Dungeons and Dragons, and probably will branch off into other role-playing games because you've watched my videos, you know that it's sometimes hard for me to stay focused. Dungeons and Dragons is the OG of the role-playing games. I mean, to a lot of the laymen, and by laymen I mean people that don't play or whatever, when you say tabletop RPG, they are going to associate that with Dungeons and Dragons because that is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the elephant in the room when it comes to, tabletop war. No, that's Games Workshop. In terms of role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons is everywhere. Whether you're watching, Critical Role on YouTube or Twitch, you're watching Stranger Things. That's a big part of that particular show. They just had a movie that came out, in the last year. I really enjoyed Honor Among Thieves. Your mileage may vary. But, Dungeons & Dragons has been around for almost 50 years, if not exceeding 50 years. And to be fair, Dungeons & Dragons didn't start as a role-playing game. Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax were playing a game called Chainmail. And one of them, I think Arneson, came up with some rules to actually, give character progression, make it, slowly turning it into the game that, people love, or hate, depending upon your fixation. They formed TSR, and Dungeons & Dragons was born. One of the confusing things about at least that old Dungeons & Dragons was there was, after the initial white books, they had two different versions, which, to some people would find that immensely confusing. You had, like, the basic box set, which, had, 3 rule books, a player's book, a DM's book, I think some Book of Monsters, came with some polyhedral dice, other things. And, it was, kind of that introductory box set. And then you had, what was later called Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and, well, it was definitely advanced. Gary Gygax did love his charts and tables, and he had, charts and tables for everything, whether it was disease spreading, how things aged, random tables to help generate, locations, whatever the case was, tons of tables. And, it spread. I started playing, when, with the red box with the giant red dragon on the cover. I still have a lot of really fond memories. And I was really young, and so were the friends that I played with, and I have zero belief that we played even remotely close to the rules, but we had fun doing it because we got to create characters, tell stories, roll dice, kill monsters, save the kingdom, because sword and sorcery, fantasy, the whole thing, whether you're making an Aragorn or a Legolas knockoff, it's a lot of fun. And when I wasn't playing, and during the summertime when there was no school, we played every day, we played a lot. But for me, half the fun was rolling up characters. And when I say rolling up characters, back in the day, and I think there are some, if you're going with the OSR, I'm not sure if they do it, but you actually roll dice for your stats as opposed to pulling from a dice pool or having, potential stats assigned, for the truly hardcore, you roll 3d6 6 times to assign those to your stats. And yeah, if you're really, really hardcore, you go in order. You don't even pick. If you're less hardcore, you roll 4d6, drop the lowest die, and depending upon, probability, odds, luck, however you want to look at it, you may or may not come up with decent stats. And back in the day, if you wanted to play certain classes, you had to have minimal stats in certain attributes. Like you had to have, I think, a 15 intelligence if you wanted to be a wizard, like 15, 14 wisdom if you wanted to be a cleric. Fighters needed, 13, 14, something like that for strength and so on. Each class seemed to have its own minimal requirement, and depending upon how craptacular you rolled, you may or may not, have to do that. But being the toon whore that I am, like I was created when I played World of Warcraft, I loved creating new characters, coming up with new backstories. Same with Knights of the Old Republic, or the Old Republic, the MMORPG for Star Wars. I would create a ton of different characters just to try out new things, and new visuals, things like that. But I had a lot of fun. That was also where I really got my taste for storytelling. I read a lot, as a child. I was always surrounded by, fantasy and sci-fi books. I would go to the library, I would check books out, and just, I would consume books, Even if it was a bad book, I didn't know the difference. People crap on Terry Brooks' Shanner series. I loved them. I still enjoy them. And, yeah. But, we would, have these epic adventures, create castles, as our characters progressed until, we got bored and, came up with a new set. Well, when we moved back to the States, I, met my new group of friends, and that was about the time that second edition, had come out. And, in high school, and it was still Dungeons and Dragons, but it was, quite a bit different. I don't remember a whole lot from second edition. I just remember the explosion of books. There were books for everything. There were brand new settings. They started putting out specific class books, and I played. I didn't run too much in second edition, but I had several friends that did. I had a lot of fun. But for me, Dungeons & Dragons really came into its own with third edition. After Wizards of the Coast, I know. After WotC purchased TSR, because TSR basically about put themselves into the ground. And they put out third edition. And third 3.5 are where I found Dungeons & Dragons really thrived. It was a bit more balanced. They did, you still had the option if you really wanted to play, to roll up your character with, 3 or 4d6, but they introduced the different pools that you could draw from to allocate your stats. And depending upon the race that you picked, you might get a boost to your con, or your boost to your, intelligence, whatever the case is. But I played a lot of 3 and 3.5. I ran a lot of 3 and 3.5. And I really, that is still one of the standout, versions for me. There was, it had that eventual power creep because, they started putting out a lot of splat books. 3 and 3.5 is when they put out the the open gaming license, where basically they would put out a SRD, system resource something or other. But basically they put the basic rules and a lot of things out into the open domain, so that if you wanted to create your own setting, if you wanted to create your own adventures, whatever the case is, you could use the SRD and the the OGL, and as long as you gave the proper attribution to Wizards of the Coast and whatever, you can go ahead and have your own compatible 3.5 rules. And that's where a lot of small indie gaming companies came up. The biggest issue, again, they started putting in a bunch of splat books. And by a splat book, I mean, we're going to take the fighter and we're going to give him a whole bunch of stuff that makes him overpowered. All of a sudden, people are playing a lot of fighters. Well, now we want to do that with the thief. I think they were still called the thief back then. In first edition, I think in the second edition, the rogue was a thief. They didn't mince words. This was a person that stole. Not just, a rogue, but I digress. All right, so, now we're going to, beef up the rogue, beef up the thief. Now the thief is just a hair more powerful, more interesting things than the fighter. Next, we're going to do, the magic user, the wizard, the warlock, whatever the case is. And incrementally, more powerful options started coming out from these third-party providers, and all of a sudden, you went from your core book, Player's Handbook, DMG, Monster Manual, and all of a sudden, from there were the official books, and then everyone also bought all these unofficial splat books, and nobody wanted to say no. Some of the rules were just absolutely fantastically broken, and I flat out, when I started a new campaign, I flat out told everyone, here are the books you can use. If you want anything else, you need to run it by me. Don't, just start using any old book that you want. I want to make sure that it's not going to break my campaign. It honked a couple of people off, but, they got over it because I'm the one running the game, and if they wanted to play, that's how it goes. Well, third edition evolved into 3.5, and I still think 3.5 is the superior version of the 3s. It just had a bunch more options, some more flavor, things like that. But at this point, it really branched away from the old first and second edition dungeon delving. The whole point of the party is to go into caves, to go into that dungeon, explore, and kill everything. 3 and 3.5 really seemed to push the narrative of the party, of actually exploring, building a story around these characters. Sure, there was adventure, and sure, you might go into caves or into a dungeon, but at the same time, you might also travel across land, country to country, from town to town, whatever the case is, into the more traditional story adventure as opposed to just the strict dungeon delving. I personally like that a lot because, sure, going down and killing a bunch of stuff can be fun, but I also do enjoy character interactions. I do enjoy trying to build my character so that they're just more than just some sword-swinging fighter or, the fireball-casting wizard or magic user, whatever the case is. There's a lot of nuance in there, especially with some of the subclasses, where you can actually branch off and specialize in something, more than just swinging a sword, carrying a shield, whatever the case is. 3.3 and 3.5 also really pushed a more tactical combat. That was where we started using the ChessX maps with gridded squares, 5-foot moves and all of that. And at that point, I was also starting to play miniature war games as well, like Warhammer, Necromunda, 40K, things like that. So that added another aspect to the hobby that I really enjoyed, namely painting miniatures. Because, that's one of the ways that I like to be creatively active, is to paint miniatures, whether the character lives or dies. Is important, but I do like plopping down a fully painted miniature and having the rest of the players of the DM ooh, that looks nice, can I take a look at that, that kind of thing. The game did change quite a bit because in again, you're pulling from a pool to create your attributes for your character. They actually, I seem to remember, either with 3 or 3.5, there was a piece of software that came with one of the books that you could actually create your characters with, which I thought was really nice, especially, since you could print them out, save them, and then, it speeds up the creation process as opposed to having to take a lot of notes or whatever. There wasn't a whole lot for the backgrounds, but then again, I still used some background generators, and I fully admit I was that player that turned in, the 10-page indexed backstory, that somehow I had done all of this stuff, I'd had all this crap, happened to my character, blessed by a god, cursed by a demon, carrying around some ancient relic. But I'm only first level, so this is, I'm really starting to get into this whole adventuring game. It's fun writing up, backstories like that, but at the same time, I also understood if, my GM, my DM, whatever, didn't actually read the whole thing, knows my name, knows what my profession is, knows what my race is, boom, let's play. Well, towards the end of the 3.5 cycle, TSR Wizards of the Coast felt that they were probably losing a lot of money to all of these indie companies that are using the OGL to make money. They didn't like that, so they decided to go with the new edition, 4.0, D&D 4th edition, and they changed up the SRD, or they released one specifically for it. I forget if it was called the SRD or the OGL. I'm pretty sure it was called something different. I'll probably see a comment in it below. But nobody wanted to use it because it was a lot more restrictive. A lot more control was given to Wizards of the Coast. Excuse me. And, to be honest, nobody really used it. And that's where Paizo came in. Paizo was a company that produced some third-party content for 3 and 3.5, and they produced, I think, some magazines, some zines, and some supplements. But using that OGL, they went ahead and created Pathfinder, which Pathfinder 1 was a continuation of Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 with some changes. But if you didn't like 4th edition, and depressingly enough, a lot of people didn't, 4th edition was definitely designed for like a tabletop, or for a VTT, virtual tabletop, because they were working on it. It just never came to fruition, but everything was based off of the battle grid as opposed to theater of the mind. Everything was 5-foot steps, this amount of movement, spell ranges, casting cones or blast markers or, cubes or whatever the case is. Everything that would fit in like, 5-foot squares, just like the regular combat. It also introduced some ideas of always-on powers, so that even when your wizard was out of spell slots, no more magic, he could at least still cast, something like, magic missile, once around, whatever the case is. Fighters always had something that they could do. A lot of people felt that they were trying to make it too much like an MMORPG, where, you had your rotations, depending upon what class you were playing, to spam, your enemy until it's dead. And, to be honest, there was a little bit of fair complaint about that. But needless to say, 4th edition didn't cut the mustard, so to speak. It was often derided. Most people that have played multiple editions do feel that it is the worst edition. I never played 4th edition as a player. I ran 4th edition, and personally, I thought it had a lot of really good ideas. It really introduced the idea of helping to quickly beef up or lower the challenge of monsters, depending upon how well or how badly your battle was going. It introduced the idea of minions. Minions are, just as they sound, a horde of goblins, a horde of skeletons, but they all have 1 hit point each. They still do quite a bit of damage, but depending upon your character, they might have like a feat called Cleave that allowed them to effectively move through a bunch of monsters with 1 swing. And then you also had some options such as, I forget what it's called, but effectively it's bleed over damage. Your fighter, your barbarian, swings their greatsword, their battle axe, and they do 16 points of damage. Well, you did that to 1 monster. That monster had 4 hit points. As an example, well, if you did 16 damage to a 4 hit point monster, you got 12 points of bleed over. Regular play, well, that's excess damage that doesn't go anywhere. Depending upon, how you played it, you might carry that, additional 12 damage through and either do the additional amount of damage to the next guy or half the damage, which still might kill a 4 hit point monster. But with minions, you got without 1 hit point, so you drop a fireball, they're all toast. Or if you've got Cleave or something that allows you to continue to attack, if you drop a monster with that particular attack, you've got somebody that could potentially roll through 5 or 6, and it can be very cinematic and very epic. They still have the potential of doing a bunch of damage because they're still going to get their attack rolls depending upon the turn of initiative. But that epicness of mowing through a bunch of orcs or a bunch of goblins or a bunch of skeletons is pretty cinematic and very cool. One of the other things that I really liked is the concept of bloodied, where you don't necessarily have to tell your players the big bad or whoever is now at half hit points or is really wounded. Once they get to bloodied, that usually indicates that they're about half hit points, and sometimes different powers might kick on as they reach that point. Or, they might say, well, discretion is the better part of valor, and, book it, getting out of combat. I personally do try to play my villains, my bad guys, as relatively intelligent, and with very few exceptions will they fight to the death. If they have an opportunity to escape and live to fight another day, they will send those minions in to create a wall of bodies and escape. And there is something to be said to have that recurring villain that is the thorn in the player's side until you finally do have that epic battle. So, 4th edition, as I said, not while it sold decently to good, not very popular among the fan base, not very popular among the players. It does have its proponents, but it just didn't work out. So Wizards of the Coast, branched away and started working on 5th edition. And after a bunch of play testing, I did play a little bit of 5th edition, the play test, but it came out in, I think, 2012, 2014, somewhere in there. And it took a lot of, it really for me felt more like, 3.75 to an extent, but it introduced a lot of different concepts, advantage and disadvantage, as opposed to telling somebody, okay, roll a d20 and then, add your bonuses or subtract this, since it's dark, or you've got the high ground, if you're Obi-Wan Kenobi going against Anakin Skywalker, as opposed to trying to figure out a bunch of pluses and minuses and figuring that out. You've got advantage. Advantage is you roll 2d20 and you pick the highest of the two. Now, to be fair, if you're Khealos, that isn't always going to be a good thing because, whether you roll a 5 or 7 on both dice, those are still low numbers. But at the same time, if you're going into someplace that's dark or you're negotiating from a disadvantage, they've got something you want, you're desperate, you might say roll a negotiation skill, but roll with disadvantage. Same basic idea. You roll 2d20, but instead of taking the highest, you take the lowest. So you might have a nat 20 or a nice high roll on that one, and then roll like a 5 on the second die, and since it's disadvantage, you take the lowest die. But 5th edition reignited the franchise. It took off. To be fair, Pathfinder still, was kicking ass. They made Pathfinder 2.0, where they took the original the OGL license, and they changed the game quite a bit. I've never played Pathfinder. I've seen it played. It's a bit crunchier than I like. Your mileage may vary. But, 5th edition really took off. And then that's when Critical Role, they came along. Bunch of, Liam O'Brien, excuse me. Basically asked Matt Mercer to run a D&D game, a Pathfinder game for his birthday. Invited a bunch of voice actors over, and they had a blast. A lot of them had never role-played before. They got together with Geek and Sundry and said, hey, we'd like to... well, they played for a little bit, then they synced up with Geek and Sundry and said, hey, we'd like to stream our games. And they switched from Pathfinder to 5th edition D&D, or the the Mercer edition of 5th edition, where he mostly sticks with the rules, but at the same time, he has his own rules. And that's one of the beautiful things about not being confined to a computer. You have the ability to be very flexible and to make changes on the fly, or say, I don't like this, and, put your own spin on it. If you haven't seen the first, the Vox Machina era of Critical Role, it is very rough at the very beginning because they're getting their feet underneath it. The cameras aren't great. The audio isn't great. They have miniatures and all that, but for a lot of the effects, if somebody's invisible, or somebody is some spell effect on them, they would pull the little rings off of plastic bottles, various colors, to represent that before they actually got before they started getting better tokens. And to everyone's surprise, Critical Role exploded. They increased their viewership week after week because they streamed every Thursday, and it turned into this small little empire. The ultimate geek dream, playing games and getting paid to do it. But through Critical Role and a bunch of others, streaming sites, a bunch of other online streamers, 5th edition absolutely took off. And the stigma of 4th edition was, forgotten because 5th edition was, so much better. And a lot of people felt it was, going back to the feel of the old 3.5, the older versions. Now, to be fair, not everyone likes 5th edition because they think it's too easy mode. As opposed to playing, a gritty hero, they want that OSR feel. OSR is where they're taking the old, grittier Dungeons & Dragons or games like that. OSR stands for Old School Revival. I personally call it Old Sociopath Revival because, goddamn, looking back at, 1st edition, it was brutal. 1st edition, you get down to 0 hit points. Guess what, son? You're dead. That's it. New character time. And don't expect, the cleric to resurrect you or cast Revivify or anything like that. When you're dead, you're dead. 5th edition, you have death saves. If you drop down to 0 hit points, you're pulled out of, you fall unconscious. And every turn, every turn, you roll a d20. And I think it's on an 11 up. You pass your death save. On a 10 or less, you fail your death save. Make 3. If you pass 3 death saves before you fail 3 death saves, you stabilize. You fail 3 death saves, well, you're dead. And depending upon if there's a cleric or if there's a paladin or somebody that can run over, they can cast Cure Light Wounds, lay hands. Depending upon how friendly the DM is. They might allow you to pour a potion down, the unconscious dying character's throat. They pop back up. First edition, second edition. I think second edition you could go up to negative 10 hit points before you die, but again, it's been a very long time since I played. But for the OSR folks, they do not like how easy mode Dungeons & Dragons is. They want that gritty Conan the Barbarian, sword and sorcery, mutilate, murder everything, death around the corner at every adventure. That's not fun for me. Addie?
Not a treat.
I don't want... I've played in those gritty, realistic games where, death is around the corner, where you've got 4 or 5 different characters as a backup for when you die, not if you die. But for me, if I'm playing a fantasy game, I don't want to put a lot of effort into a character and then have them killed, by a lucky DM shot. I try not to pull my punches, especially, if it when the dice are actually going my way. But at the same time, I want my players to have fun, and unless it's an epic battle and, there's a lot of give and take, TPKs are no fun for anyone involved. And watching, the players' faces as one by one they drop, and unlike, a raid or a dungeon in, say World of Warcraft or something, okay, well, we all wiped, we're going to reset, we're going to try a different strategy. That's not going to happen. Yeah, OSR is for the people that are trying to capture that ancient feel. And there are some aspects of it that, can be fun, but that's just not for me. Other things, from the earlier editions, I don't know if it carries over to the OSR, but not only did you get experience points for killing monsters, to help you level, you also got experience points when you got gold or whatever. So there was always that, hoarding of gold, capturing of gold to get, additional experience. I definitely like the milestone option in 5th edition. Milestone being you complete a major story arc. You defeat the big bad, or you make it out of the dungeon alive. Everyone levels up, as opposed to, all right, well, you guys killed the goblin. You killed the Goblin King, you killed all of his minions, and that's 450 experience, and then you found, 100 gold, so, blah, blah, blah. And, I grew up doing that kind of thing, but it's a lot more bookkeeping. And then you also run the risk of, if somebody misses a session, they don't get, unless you're going to give them half or something like that, or somebody who plays their character, people are going to start falling behind. Your mileage may vary, but again, I'm not a sadist. I don't feel like I need to penalize my players. I want them to have fun. If the game is, if you're told that the game up front is going to be that OSR, brutal, nasty, violent, death around the corner, that's great, but don't spring that on your players. And that's why session 0, at least in my opinion, is very important, so that you can set the tone and tell the players what they can expect in your adventure, as opposed to springing it on them in the first adventure or, later on. For me, I also I like the growth of the characters. I don't like starting at like 10th level or, higher. I'm one of those weird people that actually do enjoy the first level, the first several levels, because while it can be a struggle, at the same time you get to see that progression, whereas you might come up against a band of goblins and they may or may not go down without a fight. You might take some people down, but that struggle to fight against, those what most people consider a weak opponent, because it forces you to strategize. Do you charge straight in, or do you pick them off? Do you try to lure some of them away, with traps or whatever? But yeah, Dungeons and Dragons, still, the most popular game out there, despite the OGL kerfuffle earlier this year, where Wizards squandered the last, 8 or so years of goodwill that they had built up. So many YouTube channels that I have followed that evangelized, 5th edition, so many, different YouTubers that have used the 5th edition OGL and SRD to produce content compatible with 5th edition, suddenly realized how much of a potential issue it was to do that when Wizards decided that they were going to completely revamp it, revoke the old one, and potentially start grabbing, for lack of a better term, fan and third-party creator content without compensating them. And that went back and forth. There was so much news that came out. And yeah, whoever thought that was a great idea probably no longer works for Wizards. I would certainly hope so. That probably came from Hasbro more than Wizards. There's a lot of information out there. I'll be perfectly honest. It has been a long time since I've looked into it. And yeah, I still like the product. I am looking forward to One D&D. I've been enjoying a lot of the Unearthed Arcanas that have come out. I think my favorite is the most recent one with Bastions. It's a little rough around the corner, but I keep having to remind myself, and I keep having to remind everyone else, these are Unearthed Arcana, these are playtests. These are not the finished product. At least I'm hoping a lot of it's not the finished product. The simple fact of the matter is they're gauging interest, they're getting feedback, and, whether you're negative about this or not, they're trying. They're looking for something new, and I am certainly looking forward to it. I'm also hopefully going to start running my own campaign. I need to, put the feelers out, get some players. I know some of the people that I play BattleTech with also play D&D, or role-playing games, more specifically there again. I say looking for a group and immediately jump to D&D, but Dungeons and Dragons, while it is the giant behemoth in the room, it is not the only game, and I do like playing other games. Savage Worlds comes to mind. It's one of the games that I ran a lot of. I really enjoy the system. But that's a ramble for another day. So, what version of Dungeons and Dragons did you start? Do you play Dungeons and Dragons? What got you into it? Did you, watch Critical Role? Did you listen to Critical Role? Did you get into it from Stranger Things? Because believe me, we didn't have miniatures when I played Dungeons and Dragons at the same time period that Stranger Things was set. But, a lot of what we had, I did, very similar things. Although I wish I had a Hellfire Club, when I was in, grade school and high school. When I lived in England, one of the teachers did have an after-school D&D session. I played in that several times, but that didn't last, or at least I couldn't make it for whatever reason. I played several sessions, and then, things happened. But, yeah, what version of Dungeons and Dragons is your favorite? Did you like 4th edition? Did you play 4th edition? Where do you think the game's going? I'm certainly curious, but again, as most people know, I am ever the optimist, especially when it's coming to what's going on. And, Wizards of the Coast is not the most popular company out there. Keep in mind they are a massive multi-million dollar company. They're a subsidiary of Hasbro, although they are... I believe Magic the Gathering is still, raking in, record amounts of money, despite, some of the kerfuffle with that as well. But Dungeons and Dragons, King of the Hill for right now. Who knows? That might change. I do think that a lot of people have sprung back from the OGL fiasco earlier this year, because I'm still seeing a lot of 5e content. People are still talking about, the different things, and every time a new whoa, oh, looks like a rabbit. And every time a new Unearthed Arcana comes out, there are a ton of videos, and I would like to get into that as well. Oh, yep, that's a little bunny hopping along the fence line. I'm not sure if you can see him. Oh, sorry, dude. And, you know, let's face it, most videos are going to get the most likes when you're talking negative about stuff. You know, I know several of the YouTube video channels that I follow, as soon as they start talking negative about Warhammer, does get the most likes. Same kind of thing, you know, the hating on Wizards of the Coast, everyone, you know, was jumping on that, and that was, you know, a giant cluster. But still, I still like the game. I've bought the last several of the starter sets. I still need to get the newest one. Not that, you know, I'm a completionist, but I do like the material. But, you know, let me know what you think about Dungeons and Dragons in general. Do you play it? Have you played it? Do you plan to play it? What edition did you get started with? Go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave some comments below, and I'll catch you in the next video.